Hi, this is Richard Jacobs with myduiattorney.org, and I'm here today with Douglas Riddell. He's a criminal attorney out of Columbus, Ohio. How you doing?
Doing great. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to help.
No problem. All right. Yeah, just to start right off with the questions. So what motivates you to be a criminal defense attorney, and why do you tend to work on a lot of DUI or OVI cases? I guess they're called in Ohio.
Well, oh yeah, we have OVIs here in Ohio, and I think for me, as someone who I guess considers myself a professional, it's amazing to me how there really is no typical prototypical defendant in a traffic DUI case. So you're going to see a lot of people who've never been in trouble in their lives, who are grandmothers, parents, professionals, executives, um, lawyers, stockbrokers, marketers. I mean, any level of person could go out, have a night out with friends or with family or a work function or something, and come home, have too much to drink, and suddenly they're looking for an attorney, and that's kind of where I feel like I can help people and relate to them and kind of guide them through that process. For me, it's pretty rewarding,
Okay.
especially because I know I can usually get a good result for a client.
Right on. All right. And how many years have you been working on OVI cases or DUI cases?
I was a prosecutor for several years, and then now I've been out on my own in a firm for about 4 years. So it's been about 7 years.
Oh wow. All right.
Yeah.
And so you said there's really no typical DUI defendant circumstance, but do you see more first-time people or more repeat offenders?
Um, I would probably say that the majority of our clients are going to be first time offenders. They're
Okay.
going to be the kind of people who take some initiative and look for an attorney or go seek this out. Some people, when they, um, if you've gotten a two or three, you're maybe down on your luck at that point, and so you kind of just stick your head in the sand and hope that it goes away. For the most part, people who get an OVI, they get one, and that's it. And so, I mean, typically I'm seeing younger people first time, and I'd say in the out of college up to their mid to late 30s range.
Okay. Of the people you see, do you think they know anything about DUI before they get one? Do you think that I don't know the public out there knows a lot about it or nothing or
I mean, I think everyone has heard a couple things, or they know a lawyer who's told them to do this, or not take the test, or to not say this to the officer. And everyone's seen the Law and Order kind of shows where they're going to hear about your Miranda rights or my constitutional rights,
Hmm.
and so I mean, people know to some extent, but then again, there's so many intricacies to this area of the law that I think that there's also a lot of misconceptions out there that people don't understand.
And do people call it DUI when they see you, or do they call it OVI?
People, for the most part, still use DUI because that's just what they're familiar with. But
Okay.
that actually leads to the conversation where they say, "Well, actually, I didn't get charged with a DUI. I got charged with an OVI." So they think it's actually a different type of offense, and
Oh,
that's
okay.
where you explain to them that's actually the same thing, but they've just changed the terminology because in the past they used to consider it driving under the influence, and now it's operating, which is going to classify a lot of different types more. It kind of creates a broader range for officers to charge you if they didn't necessarily see you driving or something like that. If your keys are in the ignition, that might be enough for operation.
Okay, I gotcha. So, of the clients you see, do a lot of them come close to the point oh 0.08 level, or do you see a lot of higher blood alcohol levels?
Oh gosh, I mean, I've had the range from a 0.28, just came in the door actually a couple weeks ago, to a 0.002. The guy had been pulled over, literally had maybe some mouthwash, but had some leg injuries and got pulled over for a traffic stop, and suddenly is getting charged with an OVI. So, I
Huh.
mean, it really does uh, range all over the spectrum with me.
Okay. And then you said there's no common person that gets arrested for DUI, but are there particular circumstances? Do you know, like, do a lot of people say, "Oh, I was at the bar," or do a lot of people say, "I was at someone's house"? Is there any commonalities there where they're coming from?
Typically, a client that comes in the door is going to be coming from a bar. I mean, that's typically the circumstances, especially here in Ohio, where you're talking about an area that's more spread out than if you were to live in Chicago or New York City or something like that. If you're out at a bar, you might be 10, 15 miles from home. And so that leads to having a few too many drinks and then just trying to call. Maybe in this area, calling a cab is the way to go, obviously, but it's not always easy at 1 in the morning to get a cab in Columbus, Ohio, or anywhere in Ohio for that matter.
That's true. That's true. So, do you say okay? So I guess you tend to see, hmm, I guess more DUIs in rural areas or more city areas. Is there any commonality there?
Well, I would say more likely to be in the cities just because there's more officers, and I think also that the officers in a Columbus or an area like that, Cincinnati, Cleveland, they're going to be more um, business like in their approach. They're going to kind of view people as a number. Whereas if you get into certain small towns, you might pull over somebody you went to high school with, and you pat them on the head and say, "Get yourself home." And
Gotcha.
so, I mean, that is something that happens, especially more in the rural counties. But I mean, you really could get one anywhere, especially if you're out on one of the main roads. I
Right.
think you're gonna run into a state trooper if you're weaving all over the road somewhere. They're in Ohio. The state troopers have a presence all over the place, all over the state.
Okay. And the cases you see, are you seeing any more drug cases lately, or is it still mostly alcohol?
Mostly alcohol, but there's you see some combo cases where you're going to see alcohol and drugs, and then there's in Ohio especially now there's a lot of these prescription drug issues that we have going on, and I actually see a lot of those kind of cases now where someone is clearly impaired, but they don't know what it is, and actually those can be in many ways more difficult for the state or the government to prove against someone because they don't know what it is. And if they don't take a urine test, or if you're even if they do, the evidence that you're going to need to introduce a urine test into a court system is much more complicated than the breath machines that they use.
Oh,
So,
okay.
um, and in many ways, if you get a drug charge for a DUI, it's going to be an easier case probably to beat.
Okay. And the state of Ohio, has Ohio set limits on certain drugs, whether they're legal or illegal or prescribed? As you know, if you have X concentration of this drug in your body, it means you're impaired or not.
As of right now in Ohio, they've begun to do that. They have that classification for marijuana and cocaine. However, some of these prescription drugs that are being used, and I feel like just about every person that comes in the door these days was drinking, but also had Percocets or something else, Adderall or something that's in their system that they can't really classify because it's not in the code at the moment. So that creates complications for police officers because it's easier for them to be able to cite to a number and say, look, the limit is this, they're over that limit, they're guilty. Whereas if there isn't a number out there, it creates more gray area as to whether what the level is to show some kind of impairment. So it's kind of an interesting thing with the drug cases now.
Okay. All right. So, in the state of Ohio, is there any other unique DUI laws that you want to talk about? Whether it's in Columbus or the entire state.
Well, there's two tiers for an OVI as far as the breath test, as far as the legal limit. You got the point oh 0.08 is your low tier. If you're over point oh 0.08, you're charged with an OVI per se. If you're over a 0.17 charge, that's called the super OVI or super DUI in Ohio, which is considered a high test, which carries heightened penalties, including some additional restrictions on your license. You might see people driving around Ohio with yellow plates. yellow colored license plates. Those are actually required for the plea to a high test OVI. Additionally, you may be required to install a device on your car that is an alcohol monitoring device. If you were to try to start your car, you'd have to blow into that before just to get your car started. So those are the kind of charges that I'm always, if my client's charged with a high test, I'm always going to be fighting to get away from that if we can't beat the case altogether.
Okay. I don't know if you ever run into this, but what about immigration and DUI? You know, people that are resident aliens or they're not full citizens. Does Have you ever run into cases like that? And does it have any effect on the immigration status?
Well, there's been some research out there about for foreign individuals or not undocumented, showing that uh, if you were to be arrested and found guilty of an OVI right now, that is not going to be grounds for a deportation in Ohio. So that is a good sign if you're an undocumented person facing a charge like this, that it won't necessarily, it's not considered a crime of moral turpitude, which is the standard. So there is probably good reason to think that if you do get stopped, that it's not going to lead to an automatic deportation.
Okay. What's your best tip? You know, someone's driving, they've had one or more drinks, they're in the process of being pulled over. Do you have any recommendations that they should follow?
Keep driving. I would say, first of all, you hear these stories. Should I take the breath test? Should I not take the breath test? I think the rule of thumb is you should only take a breath test if you're 100% sure that you're going to pass, because these there's such a thin line with these breath tests and the machines, and there's so little that you can do once the result has been recorded in terms of contesting it. Now, there's ways to test the calibration of the machine and the records and anything else to try to pick apart the results of the test. But once they have that test, they can try to trot that out as science. And so I'm never, people like to hear numbers. And if a prosecutor is going to try to throw out a number and say, look, your client was a 0.14 test, uh, you got to really go the extra mile, which we do, to try to see if you can get that test thrown out. But I mean, at the end of the day, you can save yourself a lot of grief and usually get yourself a far better deal
Mm-hmm.
by not taking that test, especially if you are not sure if you're going to pass. If you're borderline, chances are it'll be over. And so you never want to give evidence to the police officer that they can eventually use in court, whether that be the field sobriety test, admitting to what you've had to drink. If someone asks you, have you had anything to drink? And the person says, I've had a couple. Well, that's an admission to drinking, because in theory, if you said no, then it's your word against the officers, and no one really knows if you were drinking or not if you said no. So, I
Right.
mean, the goal on a case is to not give them evidence. It's hard to do at the scene because you see those flashing lights and you're scared. But if you kind of keep your cool and remember that this is an interrogation, you can probably set yourself up for a good deal down the road.
Okay. And of the cases you've dealt with, what kinds of help are you typically able to provide to to your cases? Are you able to more often reduce fines or jail time, or what kinds of benefits do you tend to bring to the cases?
Oh yeah, I mean, first of all, I would say that for when you're charged with an OVI or DUI charge, I would always say it's essential that you make sure that you have counsel for the case, because at the end of the day, your attorney is going to save you money. They're going to help you get through the process. They're going to save you time. They're going to save you from having to deal with the excessive punishments that you might see. And chances are they're going to help you get that OVI off your record, because ultimately, if you're a 21-year-old or a 24-year-old and you're out of college, and in this economy you're looking for a job and you got a DUI on your record and the other guy doesn't or the other girl doesn't, I mean, chances are, whether it's fair or not, you may not get that consideration. So you want to have an attorney who can help you through this process and advocate for you to try to get your charge reduced. And then, not to mention the license stuff. I mean, a lot of times in Franklin County or anywhere in Ohio, we're going to be able to get the license suspension thrown out or reduced or whatever we can do to try to help out this process. So, I mean, with regard to license suspensions, I mean, you want to have someone who has good relationship with the prosecutor down there and is going to be able to work something out in court to get your suspension put on hold or terminated if I can find a loophole there or some kind of problem with the suspension, driving privileges, anything I can do to help a client. I think that it's always going to be a good idea to make sure that you have counsel.
Okay, very good. I know it's hard to just give a percentage, but I mean generically, like what level of success have you had in mitigating some or all parts of a DUI case for a client?
Well, I go into every case seeing what I can do to avoid a DUI conviction. I mean, I think that's ultimately, if you're hiring an attorney, that's your ultimate goal. I mean, obviously, having an attorney is going to help you in other ways in terms of trying to get yourself from avoiding jail time or higher fine or longer license suspension. But the goal is to try to beat the case or beat the case down to something besides an OVI. And I mean, I'd say these days, I uh, I don't know if I can put a percentage on it, but I'm going to say that it's a high percentage. It's a percentage that I'd be proud of. That I think that if a client has a case that I can, where there's something that I can use to exploit either something that on the legal side or something that has to do with their personal history that we can kind of use our relationships to get a better deal with. I think that for the most part, we're going to have success getting where we want to be.
Okay. And do you feel like over the past 7 years it's gotten easier or harder to defend cases? Has it changed at all?
I won't say easier, but I do think that once you have a presence at a certain courthouse or in a jurisdiction, and you've been to trials and you've been to hearings and had officers up on the witness stand, that they know that you will go that length to advocate for your client. And so you're going to get a better deal because you're not going. They're going to know that if the deal's not there that you're looking for, that you will go. You'll go all the way. And so I actually find sometimes that it can be easier now.
Okay, that's good to know. And I guess this leads into it, which you partially answered, but what are the pros and cons of hiring a private lawyer versus a public defender versus defending yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think that's one that I hear all the time. I mean, defending yourself, a case like this, if you want to go down and plead guilty and get yourself the way get the case over with, I guess chances are you're probably going to put yourself in jeopardy a little bit. You might not get the right deal. You might have cost yourself more money or a longer suspension. Maybe you don't have driving privileges in a quicker manner. Maybe you look back in 3 years and say, "Man, I really should have fought that. I really should have tried to see if I could get that charge reduced." So I'm always going to say that it's in your best interest to have an attorney. I mean, I've seen people walk up in court, plead guilty, and get sentenced to jail. So, I mean, you're putting yourself at risk if you're going to just go in there and kind of take it haphazardly. I think it's in your best interest to always have an attorney. Now, as far as a public defender is concerned, I mean, I have great respect for the public defender's office. I've had a brief stint there in my past in law school, and I know that they take pride in their work, but I can also say that they have a ton of volume. And I mean, if you're a public defender, you're dealing with 1,000 cases at a time, and maybe
Wow.
you don't have time to return a phone call for a week, or you don't have time to research the latest issues or whatever's going on, or just kind of give the personal attention. I think that if you hire an attorney, you're letting the prosecutor know that you are very serious about getting this charge reduced. You're very serious about having someone advocating for you, and there's a personal contact level that having an attorney who you're paying for the service is always going to be to your benefit, in my opinion. Having seen all those perspectives.
Okay, very good. Very good. What have you learned about people's behavior and their reaction to being arrested and prosecuted for DUI? Like what human insights have you gained into the whole process?
Well, I mean, it is a high pressure situation, and so it's kind of a big thing that some people you'll see are just calm under fire, and then other people have a complete meltdown. I mean, I think it, and a lot of times you are talking about people who have had something to drink, so you can see the best and worst of people. But at the same time, I always would advise people that it's in your best interest to try to be as cooperative as possible with a police officer, even if you're not cooperating necessarily with what they're asking you to do. If you're cooperating in a manner that is polite and respectful, that ultimately will pay off in the long run on your case.
So, like for instance, a refusal if they say, step out of the car and walk this line, instead of cursing at them, and you say, I respectfully decline. I don't feel like it's a good idea to do that. That's probably
Yes,
the best you can do.
that's the way to go. I mean, that's ultimately going to get you a little bit better treatment in court when they've marked on their report that you were respectful, polite, and cooperative. Even if you're not doing what they want you to do, even if you're, yeah, even if you're declining or basically giving them no evidence, not taking a breath test, if you're doing it in a polite manner, um, that will help you in the long run because usually the clients who are the most disruptive with the officer usually are the ones who are going to get the ones who are memorable for the officer. And
Okay,
you don't want the officer to really remember you that
gotcha.
well.
Have you had any cases where the person was perfect? They gave no evidence. They said just about nothing. They did everything they're supposed to do.
Yes, many times I've had that, which is great. But I've also had situations where someone thought that's what they did. They didn't think they gave them anything, and then we go out and watch the video or something and realize that they actually did everything,
Okay.
and it didn't go well. So
Huh.
I mean, yeah, I have seen. I call the case where you really give them nothing. I call it the perfect defense because there really is no case if they charge you and you've given them no evidence of operating a vehicle while impaired.
Okay. And is there a particular story that you hear from a lot of the clients over and over when they come in?
Well, just kind of going off the last question. I actually the story that I feel like we always hear. We're in the interview and they start telling us about their traffic stop and the field sobriety tests. And when we ask them about the field sobriety test, the answer is always, "Oh, I did fine. I did great actually." And then we go and pull the report, go and pull the video, and the thing that's interesting is that the clients don't always understand what they're being graded on. It's one of the only tests you ever see where they don't know you don't know what you're being graded on. And so when the officers mark that you failed 6 out of the 9 clues, but you remember walking the line and walking 9 steps and walking back and thinking it went fine, but in the meantime, they didn't tell you that you need to touch heel to toe or that you need to have a certain way to turn or you can't lift your arms and they're not telling you all the various clues that are out there that they're looking for. And even if you take all 9 steps great and you take 4 great steps back and then you step off the line for 1 step and get right back on, that's 1 clue, even though 17 out of the 18 steps were right. So I always think that's kind of interesting because people don't really understand what they goes into these field sobriety tests and what the science is behind them.
Okay. Do you feel the current DUI punishments are too harsh, or are they too lax, and why?
Um, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think it depends on your perspective. I probably would say that they are too harsh just because I think that the majority of individuals who have been charged with an OVI have learned their lesson tenfold by the time that they call their wife or girlfriend or parents to come pick them up at the police station. And then to make them come back and have to deal with a suspended driver's license and possibly going to jail and doing all this stuff. That is that's a pretty significant punishment when you're talking about other crimes that, in my opinion, could be more serious than that, such as domestic violence or stealing or breaking into people's property. There's no requirement that you have to go to a program or counseling or have your driver's license suspended for that, even though arguably those crimes are more serious.
Okay. And what do you see as the future of OVI in terms of the punishment levels and the number of people that get caught up in it?
Well, I would say that both categories that you just mentioned, I would expect to go up. For the only thing that would change is if the technology changed that would create cars that don't allow you to drive if you have alcohol in your system. That would be the only way I would see that would send the numbers down, because there's the population's growing. There's more officers on the street. These states want revenue with all the budget crisis out there, so they have their cops on the beat looking to get DUIs so that they can bring in fines and penalties to the state. And as far as punishments, you see Mothers Against Drunk Driving and other groups out there that they're certainly not advocating for penalties to go down.
Right.
So I would expect that as we go along here, especially in Ohio, I would expect that penalties will actually go up.
Okay. And so, what would you say makes your firm unique and you unique in providing DUI defense? And what statement do you want to make to potential clients that are watching this video?
Well, first of all, I'm going to say that I have handled thousands of OVI cases in my career, whether it was from the prosecutor side or from the defense side. So I've seen all the perspectives. I know the parties and the relationships with the prosecutors and the judges that is going to be necessary to effectively advocate for you on a case. And so I think it's important to have an attorney who's going to know the law, who's going to fight for you in the law, and is going to have good relationships with people to make sure that whatever deals or whatever possible options are going to be out there, that we can take advantage of them. I think that I can keep myself or do this work in a cost-effective manner. I think that if you spoke to anyone I've represented in the past, they'd say I've treated them fairly from a price side. And I would encourage anyone to give me a call. I give my cell phone to any of my clients. I'm always available, whether it be nights or weekends. I think that it's a personal touch that has worked well for me through the years, and I'd like to think that any client who's going to call me is going to be one who would probably refer me on to a friend.